Chapter 1. I woke up as the king's most hated consort. In his original world, Evan Clarke lived a life so painfully normal it almost felt unreal. 27 years old. Mid-level office employee. Stable salary, predictable hours. Evan was known as easygoing, the kind of man who laughed easily, brought coffee for coworkers, and never complained about overtime. He didn't chase drama, didn't like confrontation. But that was only half the truth. Evan Clarke was openly gay, unapologetic, and sharp-tongued when pushed. The smile came first, but if someone crossed a line, the bite followed fast and merciless. He had been in enough fights growing up to know exactly how to end one. People learned quickly. Joke with him, yes. Hurt him, no. His biggest weakness? Boys' love novels. Tragic ones. Obsession-filled ones. Stories where cruel kings realized their love too late, and one man in particular. His senior manager. Calm voice, broad shoulders, always composed, always unreachable. Evan never confessed. Office romance was complicated, and rejection would hurt more than silence. So he admired from afar, hiding longing behind sarcasm and jokes. That night, when the crowned Enigma and his worthless Alpha Consort finally released, Evan bought it instantly. Limited edition, hardback, no hesitation. He stayed up all night reading. Ignored messages, ignored sleep, curled on his bed with the book pressed to his chest like something sacred. The Alpha Consort, soft-spoken, submissive, constantly humiliated, died alone. No rescue, no redemption, no love returned. Evan cried. Not pretty tears. Quiet, furious ones. You deserved better, he whispered into the dark. You didn't deserve to die like that. Those were the last words he remembered. When Evan opened his eyes again, silk brushed against his skin. Not cotton sheets. Not his cramped apartment. Silk? Heavy curtains blocked the light. The air smelled of incense and cold stone. His body felt unfamiliar, lighter, fragile, too quiet. He sat up. His hands were pale, slender, marked with calluses that weren't his. His heartbeat slammed. Then memories crashed in, sharp and merciless. A palace. Mocking laughter. Lowered eyes. Cruel whispers. Aren Valerius. The Alpha Consort. The king's only spouse and most despised mistake. Evan staggered to the mirror. The face staring back at him was heartbreakingly beautiful. Soft eyes. Delicate lips. A body trained to endure, not resist. The face he had mourned. The face doomed to die unloved. More memories surfaced. Servants spilling drinks on purpose. Nobles laughing openly. An alpha like that? Pathetic. Weak. And the worst, the king. An enigma who never touched him. Never defended him. Never cared. Ignored like something unnecessary. Aren Valerius died of heartbreak. Evan stared at the reflection. Then he laughed. Low, disbelieving, dangerous. Nope, he muttered. I didn't cry for you just to become you and die the same way. Something inside him shifted. Aren had been gentle, submissive, quiet. Evan Clarke was none of those things. The change came fast. When a servant deliberately spilled tea on him, Aren didn't apologize. He stared at the man until the servant's smile cracked. Then Aren grabbed his wrist and twisted. Precise, controlled, painful. Try that again, he said mildly, and you won't use this hand anymore. The servant never came near him again. When a noble mocked him during a banquet, calling him a disgraceful alpha, Aren smiled. A sharp, terrifying smile. He broke the noble's wrist against the table in one clean motion. The hall erupted in screams. Aren adjusted his sleeve and walked out as if nothing had happened. At night, behind locked doors, the Alpha Consort trained. Until his muscles screamed. Until blood soaked the floor. Until weakness burned away. He forced strength into a body that had never been allowed to fight back. I'm not dying here, he whispered into the dark. Not quietly, not broken. The palace began to whisper. The consort has gone mad. He's changed. He's dangerous. And from the highest balcony, the king watched. Silent, confused, unblinking. The Alpha Consort no longer lowered his gaze. And for the first time since their marriage, the Enigma King truly noticed his consort, unaware that obsession had already begun to take root. Chapter 2. The king who should have hated me starts watching. King Caelum Nocthyr remembered the ending even before he remembered his own name. The memory came like a wound that never closed. The Alpha Consort died quietly, unloved, unmourned. A footnote in history. Caelum had woken from transmigration with that knowledge burned into his mind, and with a single, clear resolve. I will not let it end that way. In his original world, he had been Leonard Hale, senior manager, calm, precise, untouchable. The man everyone respected and no one truly knew. Leonard never talked much about himself. He kept his desk immaculate, his voice steady, his emotions locked behind professionalism, but after work, alone in his apartment, he devoured BL novels like they were oxygen. Dark romances, power imbalances, kings who fell too late, and one person he watched far more carefully than any book character. Evan Clarke. Easygoing, smiling, sharp as a blade beneath the humor. Leonard noticed everything. The way Evan's sarcasm cut just a second after the smile, the way his eyes hardened when someone crossed a line, the quiet violence in his restraint. He admired him, wanted him. But senior manager and subordinate. Risky, improper. So Leonard stayed silent. Then he read The Crowned Enigma and his worthless Alpha Consort. He hated it. Hated the king's cruelty. Hated the ending. Hated himself for seeing his own cowardice mirrored in the Enigma who lost everything too late. When Leonard woke up in silk sheets and cold stone walls, when servants knelt and called him Your Majesty, he understood. He was the king now, and he swore that this time he would redeem the character. That plan shattered the moment he met his consort. Aren Valerius did not bow properly, did not speak softly, did not look afraid. Instead, the Alpha Consort met Caelum's gaze with open disdain, as if daring the king to try something. When nobles whispered insults, Aren answered with violence. When servants disrespected him, they disappeared. When Caelum summoned him, Aren arrived late and smiled. Your Majesty looks disappointed, Aren drawled. Should I kneel better next time? The court went silent. Caelum should have been furious. Instead, he was unsettled. This was not the man from the novel. This Alpha moved like someone who had survived worse than a palace, someone who had learned how to bleed without breaking. And worse, someone who did not fear him. Caelum found himself watching. Too often, too closely. The way Aren's voice sharpened when provoked. The way his posture screamed challenge. The way he never once sought approval. This isn't the consort I remember, Caelum thought. And then, he saw it. During a council meeting, Aren turned his head slightly. Just enough. A faint birthmark at the curve of his neck. Caelum's breath caught. He knew that mark. He had traced it with his eyes 100 times in another world, never touching, never daring. Leonard Hale's heart slammed violently against his ribs. Evan, he whispered under his breath. The realization struck with terrifying clarity. He didn't transmigrate alone. The man standing before him, his husband, his consort, his alpha, was Evan Clarke. The person he thought he had lost forever. The person he never confessed to. Something inside? Caelum snapped, not violently, instinctively. Possession bloomed like wildfire. From that moment on, the king's gaze changed. What had once been guilt became hunger. What had once been resolve became obsession. If this world has given him back to me, Caelum thought coldly, I will never let him go again. Aren Valerius continued to meet him with sarcasm and scorn, unaware of the storm gathering behind the king's calm eyes. Both of them, in their own hearts, had made silent vows. Aren would live as the Alpha Consort, but with Evan's defiance. Caelum would rule as the Enigma King, but with Leonard's regret and desire. Neither of them realized yet that the story was already changing. Chapter 3. I trained to escape. He planned to keep me. 5 months. That was how long the palace had lived under quiet tension. 5 months since the Alpha Consort stopped bowing properly. 5 months since the king began watching too closely. 5 months since the court realized something was changing. Aren Valerius grew powerful. Not overnight, not loudly, but unmistakably. His body hardened under relentless training. The softness that once marked him as weak burned away, replaced by controlled strength and coiled violence. His alpha presence sharpened, no longer timid, no longer suppressed. Servants learned to step aside without being told. Nobles chose their words carefully now. Politically, he changed too. Aren learned who whispered and who listened, who followed orders and who sold information. He stopped reacting emotionally and started calculating. By the 3rd month, even the council hesitated to speak his name lightly. By the 5th, they feared him. The palace noticed. So did the king. Caelum tried, again and again. He summoned Aren not as a ruler, but as a husband. Tea instead of guards. Private chambers instead of courtrooms. A calm voice instead of commands. Sit, Caelum said once, gesturing to the chair beside him. Aren didn't. What do you want? He asked flatly. Caelum studied him, his posture, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes stayed sharp even in stillness. You've changed, Caelum said. Aren laughed softly. Funny, that's what people say when you stop letting them step on you. I don't hate you, Caelum said quietly. That finally got a reaction. Aren's smile vanished. I don't care why you hate me, he replied coldly. I'm leaving anyway. Every conversation ended like that. Walls built of sarcasm. Doors slammed shut with words. And each time Aren walked away, Caelum's control slipped just a little more. The escape happened without ceremony. No grand farewell. No confrontation. One night, Aren vanished. By dawn, the palace was in chaos. Guards punished. Routes sealed. Borders watched. The court panicked. The king did not. He stood at the balcony, cloak snapping in the wind, eyes dark and focused. 3 days, he said calmly. Bring him back. They didn't need to ask how. Aren made it far. Farther than anyone expected. He fought when necessary, lied when useful, disguised himself with practiced ease. For the first time since transmigrating, he tasted something dangerously close to freedom. But enigmas did not lose what they claimed. On the 3rd night, as Aren crossed a forested pass, the air shifted. His alpha instinct screamed. Caelum stepped from the shadows like he had always been there. Calm, immaculate, terrifying. Move, Aren growled, already braced to fight. Caelum didn't raise a weapon, didn't shout, didn't chase. He simply said, Come home. Aren attacked. Fists, blades, everything he had trained for. He was strong, stronger than most alphas. But Caelum was an enigma. Rare, ancient, built for dominance beyond reason. Caelum blocked every strike with minimal movement, redirected blows, took control inch by inch, until Aren's back hit a tree and Caelum's hand wrapped firmly around his wrist. Not crushing, unyielding. You're done, Caelum said quietly. Aren thrashed, kicked, snarled. Let me go. Caelum leaned in, voice low and even. No. The palace doors closed behind them with a final echoing thud. Aren was furious. He fought again, this time with words, with rage, with everything he had. Caelum restrained him without violence, hand steady, presence overwhelming. Territorial, possessive, terrifyingly calm. You're not leaving again, Caelum said. Aren laughed bitterly. You think locking me up will make me yours? Caelum met his gaze without flinching. I don't think, he replied. I know. The court watched from the shadows. They saw how the king walked closer to his consort now. How his patience grew thinner. How his control tightened. They saw how the Alpha Consort stood straighter, angrier, more alive than ever before. 2 men changing day by day, 2 wills colliding. and no one dared intervene. Because it was becoming terrifyingly clear, this was no longer a political marriage. It was a battle of obsession and escape, and neither king nor consort intended to lose. Chapter 4. The mark that changed everything. The room became a cage. Not a dungeon. Not iron bars. Silk curtains, locked doors. A king-sized bed that now felt like a boundary instead of comfort. Aren Valerius tested the limits again and again. Windows, hidden passages, even brute force against reinforced doors. Every attempt failed. Caelum never shouted, never punished, never raised his voice. He only watched, and that terrified Aren more than anger ever could. "You think this will break me?" Aren snapped one night, hands braced against the door. "I'd rather die than stay here." Caelum froze. Something deep, ancient, Enigma, stirred violently in his chest. That was when it happened. Not rage, instinct. The air shifted. Aren felt it first, an overwhelming pressure crashing down on his alpha senses. Enigma pheromones flooded the room, thick and suffocating, commanding his body before his mind could react. "No," Aren gasped, knees buckling. "Stop!" Caelum's already there, catching him before he hit the floor. His voice was steady, controlled, terrifyingly gentle. "I tried," he said quietly. "I really did." Aren's rut was forced open, violent, premature, unavoidable. Enigma dominance wrapped around alpha instinct like a lock clicking shut. The bond formed. Permanent. Irreversible. The mark was given. What followed was not described in detail, only remembered in fragments. Heat. Breathless closeness. Aren's body betraying him even as his heart shattered. And then darkness. When Aren woke up, his throat burned. His body ached in a way that made everything painfully real. The room smelled different now. Bonded. His hand trembled as it moved to his neck. The mark was there. Permanent. His chest caved in. He laughed once, broken, disbelieving. "So that's it," he whispered hoarsely. "I can't leave. Not even if I want to." Tears burned his eyes, furious and helpless. Caelum was sitting nearby, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He looked wrecked. "I'm sorry," Caelum said. Aren snapped. "You're sorry?" His voice shook. "You took my choice. You trapped me forever." Silence stretched. Then Caelum stood. And finally, he broke. "I couldn't lose you again." Aren froze. Caelum looked at him fully now. No crown, no mask, no king. "I transmigrated," he said. "I'm Leonard," the world tilted. "I also read the novel," Caelum continued, voice low. "I knew how it ended. I woke up as the Enigma King and thought, that was it, that I'd lost you forever in the real world." Aren's breath hitched. Leonard swallowed. "You were my crush, my mistake, the person I never confessed to because I was afraid." The words fell like shattered glass. "I recognized you by your birthmark," Leonard whispered. "I thought the world was mocking me, giving you back only to let you leave again." Aren said nothing. Leonard stepped closer, stopping just out of reach. "I didn't mark you to own you," he said quietly. "I marked you because I panicked, because the thought of losing you twice," his voice broke. "I couldn't survive that." Aren stared at him. At the man he had hated. At the king he despised. And suddenly, he saw his senior manager, the calm voice saying, the restrained longing, the man he had once imagined building a life with. Aren exhaled slowly. Then, softly, he said, "So, even in another world you still trapped me." There was no bitterness, just a faint, breathless laugh. Leonard blinked. Aren laughed again, this time genuinely. The sound surprised them both. "I hated the novel's Enigma King," Aren said quietly. "Not you." He reached up, fingers brushing the mark on his neck. "I never stopped loving the person behind the role." Leonard closed the distance then, carefully, reverently. The rut lasted 4 days. The palace trembled. Servants whispered. Nobles fled corridors. They watched as the king grew more territorial, more possessive, more openly devoted. They watched as the Alpha Consort, now marked, now bound, stopped trying to flee. Not because he was trapped, but because for the first time he wasn't alone anymore. And the story? It had already changed beyond repair. Chapter 5. Pregnancy, Confession, and a Different Ending. Peace returned to the palace so quietly that no one noticed it at first. There were no announcements, no celebrations, no proclamations from the throne. Only small, undeniable changes. The Alpha Consort no longer tested the walls for escape routes. The Enigma King no longer watched him like a storm about to break. Instead, Caelum pampered Aren shamelessly. Warm cloaks draped over his shoulders without asking. Meals personally inspected. Hands always at his waist, fingers brushing the mark at his neck, like a habit Caelum could not and did not want to break. Enigma. Pheromones lingered around Aren constantly. Caelum kissed the mark whenever he passed him. In corridors, in council chambers, in private, and sometimes very much not. Aren complained. Do you have to do that every time? Caelum only smiled and did it again. Yet something had changed. The Alpha Consort, once sharp with killing intent, now flushed at the attention. He looked away, ears burning, lips pressed together to hide his smile. The palace noticed. From nobles to servants to guards, whispers spread. He smiles now. Have you seen the way His Majesty looks at him? The consort doesn't scare me anymore. He glows. What they didn't know was that the love-binding king and consort hadn't begun in this world. It had followed them here. Despite the pampering, Aren never stopped training. He trained harder, smarter, learned restraint without losing strength, learned to fight not out of anger but purpose. He would stand beside Caelum as an equal, not a kept consort, not a fragile mate, a king's partner. Caelum watched him with pride so fierce it almost hurt. 2 months after the Bondaren collapsed during training. No warning, no pain, just sudden darkness. When he woke, he was surrounded by silk and panic. The royal physician knelt beside the bed, trembling. Your Majesty, your consort is... Caelum already knew. He held Aren's hand so tightly it hurt. Pregnant, the physician whispered. An alpha carrying an heir. The world froze, then exploded. The palace shook with disbelief. The capital erupted in celebration. Bells rang for hours. A child, an heir born of an Alpha Consort and an Enigma King. Caelum kissed Aren's forehead, eyes wet. You did it, he murmured. You survived. You changed everything. Aren laughed weakly. I didn't plan on fainting to announce it. The changes came swiftly. Caelum was ruthless. Every servant who had harmed Aren, dismissed. Every noble who had mocked him, stripped of influence. New laws were passed. Laws protecting those who were bullied. Laws punishing abuse hidden behind status. And before the entire court, Caelum declared, My consort is my equal, not my possession. Aren stood beside him, hand resting instinctively over his growing belly. For the first time, no one dared question it. Pregnancy was not easy. Aren struggled with mood swings, pain, frustration at his own limitations. He snapped, he sulked, he hated needing help. Caelum never complained. He stayed close, fed him, held him during sleepless nights, whispered reassurances when Aren doubted himself. One evening, Aren spoke quietly. If you cage me again, he said, eyes sharp despite the softness, I'll break it. Caelum kissed his knuckles. Then I'll build a world, he replied gently. You won't want to leave. They confessed again that night, not with desperation, but with certainty. The child was born on a stormless night, a boy, an Enigma heir with Aren's eyes and Caelum's presence. The kingdom celebrated for days, but inside the chamber it was quiet. Caelum held their son carefully, reverently. Aren watched, exhausted but smiling. We really did it, Aren whispered. They had. They changed the story. A living Alpha Consort, a devoted Enigma king, a child born of obsession and love. And this time the ending stayed happy.